Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Welcome back to Equine Assisted World. Many of us are used to the equine-assisted thing being a sort of a European, white American type thing. And we don't often consider that it might actually go a bit beyond that. So I'm really excited today to have Brandy Tomhave, who is the second executive director of the Native American Humane Society. We've all heard of the Humane Society. Again, this was something that came out, the Humane Society in America as we know it, came out of animals suffering largely in cities, particularly draft animals like horses being, dying in the shafts in the streets, and people saying, we should actually do something about this. And well, things are better. However, when I went to the Equus Film Festival in Montana in September of 2025, I met Brandy, who was fronting the newly formed Native American Humane Society and bringing to our attention a whole bunch of, animal welfare issues that actually affect us all, even though we might be living in different cultural contexts. And I think it just adds an incredible perspective to our work that allows us to broaden it, deepen it, gain more understanding. And you're going to see what I mean as this conversation unfolds, because there are very different ways of looking at animals, animal-assisted stuff, animal welfare, that have as much to do with culture as they have to do with, if you like, fact. So I don't want to spoil it for everyone. So without further ado, Brandy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Please tell us who you are, what you do, and why you do it, and then let's go from there.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am really thrilled to be joining you today. So, as you mentioned, I am the second executive director of the Native American Humane Society. I am an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation, which is located in Oklahoma. You probably can't help but notice that I am very white passing. And I mention that because being a Native American in the United States it's complicated. We all share a painful and traumatic history. My own family walked along the Trail of Tears from Georgia to, well, ultimately ended in Oklahoma. We stopped in Arkansas and I think decided that was enough. I think that our identity politics are different than the identity politics of other minorities. In the United States, Native Americans are only about 2% of the population, but very little is understood about Native Americans today and why their status is different than any other Americans in the United States. We have a very specific political relationship with the United States as a result of treaties and statutes and Supreme Court cases. So that affirm the sovereignty of tribes. And so if you're an enrolled member of a tribe, you are not so much a racial minority as a citizen of a dependent sovereign nation within the United States. And if you don't remember anything else I say today, that's really probably the most important thing you'll learn, because that fact is what everything else we're going to talk about flows from. The trauma of the not only the history that Native Americans share, but the damage that it continues to do, and how that trauma and damage is less a matter of moral failings of individuals than systemic failures of government systems. And whatever happens to people happens to their animals.
Okay.
And so,
All right. So why, you could have just, I know you're a lawyer, and I know that your husband, Jeff, is a lawyer,
oh yeah,
and that you have spent your professional lives, working on behalf of Native American rights in various ways, which needs to be done. Why did you turn your attention to animals?
you know, I, that is a really good question because I certainly wasn't looking for it. I will tell you what I was doing immediately before. Two
Okay.
things. I had worked very closely with the Navajo Nation to help stand up the first cancer treatment center on any Indian reservation to make local, culturally sensitive cancer treatment accessible to Native families who otherwise have no opportunity to deal with that disease in a way that gives them any chance of surviving it. And then I had also just represented the president of the Navajo Nation in this multi-jurisdictional effort to improve the systemic response to missing and murdered Indigenous people on the Navajo Nation.
Okay.
And that's really like, so one, the access to cancer treatment, the other one, the access to justice.
You're right.
Yeah. And so I think I'm very drawn to causes that try to provide access where none has otherwise existed. And that's only an issue in under-resourced, overlooked communities. And I have always been inspired by those kinds of causes. And, I want to help and have some impact. And that's in my own small way how I have found a path forward, towards
Right.
that goal. And then I learned about, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I had never noticed the animals. I had spent 25 years out on the Navajo Nation, working in the deep res. Every cause I've ever worked on, doesn't matter how large or small, straightforward or complex, every conversation starts at someone's table in the deep res. And my job has been to then carry that conversation forward from someone's home or office to, the council chambers, to the president's office, to Congress, to the White House, ultimately. And I had seen dogs, and you can't visit a reservation without noticing, dogs and cows and horses, outside community spaces where you just don't see them where I live now in Baltimore. I'd never really given them a thought. And then the president of the Navajo Nation asked me to accompany him to a local animal shelter in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I had no idea why he asked me to jump in the back seat. I was like, all right, I'll go along with this. I have no choice. And that really changed my life. And it wasn't the dogs, it was the people in the shelter that I found so shocking because they were so casual with their racism, frankly. They said to then
This
President.
was outside of the res, right?
Mhm.
Flagstaff.
Yeah, Flagstaff is a border town, college town, a wealthy town,
Mm-hmm.
that
It's a rather nice place. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
yeah, to the Navajo Nation. And so, it's someplace you're gonna travel to if you visit the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
And so the folks at this shelter looked at the president of the Navajo Nation and said, "Well, you really need to do something about your res dogs. 40% of the dogs in our shelter come from the reservation." And then the conversation kind of deteriorated from there. One of my and let me give you an example of how
I've just
so.
got one small quick question.
Yeah.
Why did the president of the Navajo Nation take you to this place?
He had been invited, and I think he'd been invited to.
To be lectured.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Because the dogs that were being taken from the Western Agency of the Navajo Nation were seen by this nonprofit organization as a drain on their resources. But this
Right.
nonprofit organization was
So it's
providing,
like, why are you abandoning all your dogs? We're the ones mopping up the mess. Come on, do
yeah,
something about it. That was
yes,
the message, right? Yeah.
correct. But the nonprofit organization had a contract with the county to provide these services. So it was for all county residents. And President Nez rightly reminded them that Navajo Nation families are county residents too. They're paying sales tax, they pay county taxes just like everybody else. And this nonprofit organization just didn't have the right to decide which residents they were going to provide services to. That was really not a conversation I had any business in, participating directly, but I did have a question which they entertained for me, and that was, well, how do you know those dogs are strays? And they said, well, tourists will call us and tell us that they see a dog outside of, a store or a hotel. And so we send out our van and collect them. And there is frankly just no way of let me back up.
Mm.
There was no system, there was no effort to determine whether those dogs were owned or unowned, which is problematic because on the Navajo Nation, like many tribes and frankly, lots of rural communities, owned dogs run around when they're, humans are out doing their thing during the day. The dogs are too. There wasn't a process of like, notification, giving an owner the opportunity to learn that their dog had been taken and where their dog had been taken to and where and
Right.
how to
People weren't
claim their
collaring their
dog.
dog saying this dog belongs to such and such a person, blah. Right. Yeah.
I and I think that there are just kind of inherent judgments made. We all make judgments about each other, but when you act upon those judgments in kind of such a definitive way, it can be absolutely devastating to a family,
Yeah.
right? You come home and your dog's gone.
Yes.
Your kid's best friend is gone. Your companion is gone. And so what really struck me was that these were really nice people doing a really great service for the county, trying really hard without enough resources. But attitudinally, they just thought about Navajo families as being kind of inherently different.
Well, probably neglectful. That would have been my
Yeah.
thought. And so I want to bring the conversation for a moment. So listeners and people watching this will probably be wondering, okay, well, this is interesting, but what has this got to do with equine assisted stuff? All right.
Yeah.
Well, for context, equine assisted is also part of animal assisted. And as we all know, those of us who particularly follow, say, horseboy method or any of those types of things, is that we don't just work with horses. We are working with any social animal that we are hoping that a person with a need is going to form a relationship with, and then we can work within that. So anyone who's running a therapeutic riding place, if the kid is into the dog, not into the horse, well, hey, great, we're now going to work with the dog. We might bring the horse in later. So, and we are going to talk about horses as they relate to this as well. So don't, if you are thinking, well, how's this relevant? Hold that thought, because we are, I promise, going to bring it back. But I think what we need to is let Brandy outline this cultural difference in perception, because I do feel, as we'll see in the course of this conversation, that there is stuff there for us to learn, we practitioners, how to better our service through understanding perhaps the Native American and other different ways of looking at the human relationship with animals. So, okay, just having made that point, over to you. So you're sitting in this place in Flagstaff, Arizona. You're seeing, oh yeah, these people are coming from a good place
Mhm.
emotionally, morally. They
Right.
want to do the
Absolutely.
right thing, but they don't realize that the people on the Navajo reservation have a different type of relationship with their dogs. And now there's an impasse. So people are going in there and taking dogs that are actually family dogs, thinking they're neglected dogs. Now what? Yes.
Right, exactly, and I think that, I have outed our friends in Flagstaff, and that perhaps might be unfair because that is not unique to them in
Sure.
any way. And working on the Navajo Nation, what I soon learned from the friends with whom I worked there is that there are a lot of well-intended folks parachuting into their communities, trying to help.
Yeah.
The form of that help is telling them how to treat their dogs, and that does so much damage, and that feels so much like a I'm struggling to find the words. There was a
Hmm.
time when it was perfectly acceptable to steal kids from Native
Yeah,
families,
absolutely.
and the government encouraged missionaries to do that.
100%. And sent them to boarding schools where they were all sexually abused and every kind of horrible thing happened right
Right.
in North America. Yes. Yes.
And and what was driving that was a shared assumption that those kids would be better off being raised anywhere than there in their own communities
Yeah.
by their own families. And bottom line, that is a belief that is still held pretty firmly by folks
Mhm.
who see animals on reservations. So it's not cool to steal the kids anymore, but you can rescue the dogs.
Yeah.
It's the same phenomenon, and it lands emotionally the same for the native families who find their loved one absent. And
Right.
it,
So I totally understand this. Why did you decide,
mm,
given that the human abuses that go on in Indian country are still so pressing? Why did you decide to then switch your attention to these animals?
yeah. Because it's such an extraordinary opportunity. I have worked in tribal advocacy for almost 30 years. And this is the one area that no one else has really shown up to deal with quite yet.
Mm,
The federal government has responsibility vis-a-vis treaties and statutes and case law to provide for four main things for tribes: housing, education, law enforcement, and environmental management, and not veterinary care, not animal wellness. And so there is no federal program or model that has had an opportunity to help or hurt tribes when it comes to animals just yet. What that means is that while the housing that you see on Indian reservations, it's a result of decisions made in Washington, D.C., largely by non-native people about what housing should look like. Same thing with education, same thing with public safety, same thing with land management. Here, when it comes to animals, it is an extraordinary opportunity for tribes to do authentic nation building, to decide for themselves what animal wellness systems should look like within their own communities. They didn't have that opportunity in the other spheres of daily life that I just listed. But here they do. And I find that incredibly exciting as an advocate for Native people. And everything I learned working in the sector of public safety or public health for tribal communities, all of those lessons are absolutely relevant here, because what we're really talking about is creating systems where none have ever existed before. And they are going to be created on the ground by tribes themselves, and it's going to be peer to peer knowledge sharing and coalition building, rather than having the feds issue dictates about what that should look like in a tribal community. I've never had an opportunity to be a part of that. And I am 61 years old. And that is a heck of a way to, you know, I guess move towards what I'm assuming is going to be like the last quarter of my professional life. Like
well, I
that's
think, yeah, what I think you're hitting on, which is really interesting to me, is that animals are always the ambassadorial bridge between human cultures.
Mhm.
So, for example, the Equine Assisted World that we do, the equines are a bridge between the neurotypical and the non-neurotypical. The therapy dog is a bridge between this human population and that human population. I routinely go to foreign countries and I can show up in a place where I don't speak the language and I know very little about the culture, and I can meet other horse people from that culture, and the horse is the ambassador between us. Now, it's not just that animals are not the only thing that does that. There are things within human culture like music or healing or land management, or there are many cultural things that can bridge and do bridge human societies, particularly human societies that perhaps don't understand each other very well. But I think what you're putting your finger on, which I think is fascinating to me, is that particularly the dogs and the horses in Native America can serve as a bridge, an ambassadorial bridge of understanding of the entire culture between white and Native American society. And in Europe, you know, outside of white America, if you like, there is often a sort of fascination with a perceived idea of what Native American horse culture might look like because of the adoption and really successful adoption of the horse by Native American tribes, you know, once the Spanish had shown up, and that they could use those horses very successfully against the whites. And particularly like on the Comanche Nation, you know, they kept the whites out of Texas for 300 years. I mean, without the horse, they couldn't have done it. When the horse was brought to them by the whiteys, used as a tool against the whiteys with great success, and at the same time served as a respect bridge that any of the people coming from white America into Comanche area could go, wow, these guys really know what they're doing. There's stuff we can actually learn from it. This is sort of our tradition that they've taken, and now they've made it, you know, something that we can learn back from. Whoa. So you've got people coming from that perspective too. And I think that Native American relationship with canines is also something that's been a source of fascination, because when Europeans first showed up, particularly on the plains, they noticed that people were using dogs as draft animals as well as hunting partners and companion animals and the rest of it. And so they clearly knew a whole lot more about dogs than a lot of the Europeans that were coming in. And this was a source of fascination. People wrote about it. Now we've reached a point where I would say probably it's gone the other way. The perception now is that, no, we in the, if you like, the white world know more about these things than people living in rural slums. Because when you go into an Indian reservation in the US, I've been in many of them, they often look like that. And so it's hard then, if you knew nothing about that other background, to look at that and not go, okay, these animals look kind of neglected. And at the same time, to not understand what the relationship with the animals might be. So the horses are walking around, apparently untended, but of course they all belong to people. And they actually are used. They just don't happen to be fenced. And the same with the dogs. You're in this really interesting position where I think you can speak as an ambassador for those animal ambassadors, which brings a greater understanding between these two historically antagonistic human cultures, to kind of allow the animals to do what the animals always do, which is cool us out and make us actually realize that we are the same species and ought to be on the same side, occupying the same planet. We shouldn't be trying to colonize. But yeah, I can definitely see how your experience in that Flagstaff animal shelter would have made you go, sadly, this is still colonization. It's just coming from a good place rather than a bad place. that's even more ambiguous and therefore almost even harder to address. No?
It is very hard to convince very passionate, well-intended people that they could be doing harm because it's the last thing they want to do. And I think that really challenges their core belief about themselves. I get that. That's hard for all of us. I love how you've characterized animals as being these kind of bridging ambassadors. I just want to share with you that, in my tribe, the Choctaw people and other tribal people, have thought of dogs as being ambassadors from the spirit world. And
Yeah,
I'm sure that's true all around the world, right? Same thing with horses.
absolutely.
And and I think that this nascent effort to help tribes develop their own animal wellness systems is an opportunity for them to reclaim their own historic traditional relationships with animals who unfortunately, are too often now seen as just a nuisance because reservations are not designed for companion animals. And I just have to say that on behalf of tribal folks, it's galling to have non-natives who, as you put, white people.
Call it like it is. It's fine.
It's usually white women, who look just like me. It's older white women, caravans of them who come in and start judging people about how they live and the condition of their dogs because
Mm,
those white women are living on the land that belonged to those native families not that long ago.
mm,
Like within 100 years. So you
mm.
can find people to these spaces. The reason why they didn't have problems with dogs before is because there's plenty of room for everyone. There's
Yeah.
no longer is. And the housing that the federal government provides is so small, so substandard that you have multiple generations of people. You can have 12. It's not at all uncommon to have a dozen to 20 people living in a 2-bedroom house that is not fenced. Where are the animals supposed to be? And those families and those communities have larger problems that are urgent right now regarding their own hunger and their own health and their own warmth. And they just can't quite get to the dogs like people like me who have the comfort and privilege of, all of those kinds of basic needs are taken care of. So,
Right. It's also, there's a really interesting thing. I don't know if you remember, we were in Montana together in Missoula for that festival. And there was another presentation going on, if you remember, from the local dog shelter, talking about homeless people and their dogs
yeah.
and trying to provide veterinary care for that. And
Hmm.
in the current political climate, this is getting more and more difficult, and so on, so on, and so on. And I remember thinking, yeah, often the happiest dogs I've seen are the dogs owned by homeless people because they have constant companionship from their owners. Their owners do not go out to work and leave them frequently. They are there all the time. They have a totally defined job. They're protecting, they're companioning, they're acting as sort of a bridge. They earn money because if you sit and you're panhandling and your dog is with you, people are more likely to give you money. And the dog's pretty grand. Dog doesn't care whether it's sleeping, on the street or on your sofa. And so this perception that, say, the animals owned by those people are suffering is that, well, they might be, but they often are not. And the animals owned by people living in houses are frequently suffering. So one can't really judge by those standards. And then the same thing with, say, with horses. Now, obviously, if I go on anywhere, a reservation or not a reservation, and I see horses that are obviously, say, underfed or clearly worm ridden or something like that, then yeah, I'm going to notice that and I'm going to. But the reservation that I've spent the most time on is the Navajo reservation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my relationship with the Navajo reservation in a minute, because this is specific to this conversation, because there would be no horse boy without the Navajo Nation. And I owe a debt of gratitude to the Navajo Nation. which I'll go into in a moment. When I was on the many times that I've been on there, I've tended to notice that the horses are in pretty good nick when you go around. Yeah, there's the odd horse that isn't, but for the most part, what you see, and I've seen plenty of horses in white America, not in good nick too, by the way. But for the most part, driving around that vast area, which is the size of Ireland, I believe, the horses look pretty good. And people are riding them pretty well and have a relationship with them that is to do with livelihood, not sport. It's to do with culture. And that makes generally for happy, fulfilled animals as well as people. So it's clear that there is stuff to be learned from both sides. Okay, your organization is doing a really great thing. They're going to provide, more veterinary systems, and fantastic. And at the same time, there is a relationship that one doesn't really want to disturb. Can you talk to me a little bit about what we don't want to disturb? i.e., what is the therapeutic value within Native America of canines and equines? I don't mean what fanciful notions can we white people have about Native American horsemanship or something like that. No, I don't mean that. What I mean is specifically, family to family, what role, given that we're dealing often with quite traumatized communities, what role do the dogs and the horses generally have or play in the human well-being of people living there?
Well, thank you for that question. And I am daunted by the challenge of answering it and doing it justice.
Make
So
it subjective. This is just
I'm going to
your
try my best.
interpretation. Yeah. If you're in the equine assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children, helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients? Taquine equine integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this.
So, well, first let me start with the traditional role. And then I have to come clean. The Native American Humane Society focuses upon companion animals. So I'm more able to speak to dogs, but absolutely, we horses are a huge part. Horse culture is a huge part of Native culture.
Mm.
And I have seen all the same things that you have. And let me start by saying that Native American people, there's 576 federally recognized tribes. All of them are different. They're not a monolith. Each has its own culture, history, practices,
Language.
historically and today, languages. But what they share is a extraordinary bond with animals because Native culture across the board is one based upon relationality and that we are all relations. So, we are relations with horses. We are the relations of with dogs.
Mm.
And I think that's very different than non-native cultures, at least here in the United States. And I'll just
Yeah.
limit my conversation to that. And so we've had relationships with animals since time immemorial. And and we don't distinguish between the spiritual and the scientific. It's the same.
Okay.
And we all carry our own medicine. So horses and dogs are part of tribal ceremonies and songs and practices. They are embedded in religions and native religions. So it's not at all uncommon for a tribe to traditionally view a dog as being the messenger from this world to the next. On the Navajo Nation, there's a little dog that looks like a chihuahua that is believed to have protected their winter god, the deity known as the Yebiche. And so that dog still factors into Yebiche ceremonies. I have never been a part of it. I can't speak about a Navajo ceremony beyond that, which, I have that little bit has been shared with me by very close Navajo friends. So I think that horses and dogs have always played a profound role in tribal cultures in terms of informing us as human beings who we are and our place in the universe and our relationship with all beings. Today, and then as a practical matter, moving forward, I think they were certainly allowed to just be companions. Archaeologists have dug up bones of Native people in California recently where the animals are buried with humans. We are assuming that there is a relationality there, right? Native leaders were photographed for formal portraiture in Washington, D.C., cradling puppies. So there is a relationality. And yes, and also they were used to pull travois. These are the dogs, the horses in war. Navajo people are shepherds and, obviously for, sheepdogs and hunting. And so for practical purposes, today there is an extraordinary ranching tradition with my husband's comes from a family of ranchers from the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota. And that's the home of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. And a lot has changed. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flooded the town that my father-in-law grew up in. So the place is unrecognizable from what it was just 2 generations ago. And yet the ranching practices have continued as though nothing has changed, right? So horse culture is really important and manifests in all kinds of ways, including rodeo. And rodeo, I think the only thing that's as big as rodeo in Indian country is basketball. And also, you asked me part of why I got into this. I was working basically within a kind of public safety sphere of the Navajo Nation, trying to help missing and murdered persons and their families find justice. And in the course of that effort, I unfortunately came face to face with instances of animal cruelty and abuse because there is no greater indicator of future human violence than past human violence against an animal.
Hmm.
And that's a greater indicator of future violence than human on human violence, which I think is really interesting.
Interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah, and so I actually was sent photographs of animal abuse on the Navajo Nation, and to me, this is well, the final manifestation of the trauma from genocide is when you
Mhm.
lose your own humanity,
Yeah.
and that's really what the Native American Humane Society is about, is helping tribes themselves
Mm.
reclaim and restore the human animal bond that has always existed since time immemorial, but
Mm.
that, the consequence of genocide has, really compromised because colonization is still a daily reality for a lot of Native people. It's not something that they're reading about in a history book. They're still, they got up today and are still living the consequence of that based upon the policies and practices
Absolutely.
of the US federal government. And that directly affects everything. And when people are profoundly traumatized, they bring that trauma to every relationship, including, especially, I think, with the most vulnerable,
Absolutely. The helpless. Yeah. Yeah.
helpless. Those would be animals.
Yeah. No, I get it. And what's interesting to me is that it's very natural and understandable if you are a people that have been colonized to look at the process of colonization as that people to your people. You know, my family is incredibly mixed, but on my father's side, it's Litvak, Lithuanian Jews who got out because of the pogroms, the mass killing of Jews in the 19th century there. And sort of that's what, sent them to the Americas and to South Africa, where my family's from in the last 200 years. This process of genocide, weirdly often fueled on horseback, has been going on since about the early Bronze Age. So that's about 4,000 years. And of course, where does it start? Eurasia. It starts in Eurasia. And the steppe peoples, who would have been not unlike Native American peoples. And it's
Mhm.
interesting, if you go to Mongolia, it's really interesting. You look around and go, oh, this must be what America kind of looked like before the white people showed up, because
Super.
it's,
Yes. I
yeah.
have to tell you that I have a very dear friend
uh,
who is Navajo and lives and works out of Navajo, and she went to Mongolia by herself. She's very
okay,
adventurous. And she got there and she said, I traveled all the way across the world only to find people who look exactly like me and
exactly.
my relations. I got the biggest kick out of that.
Even, and to the degree that Athabascan, Native American
Yeah.
languages seem to either originate in Northern
Right.
Asia or vice versa. We'll never know which one, but we know that it's a similar language root. And you're with the horse tribes of the steppe, and they're living in gers, yurts, which are not dissimilar from hogans and so on. And then you go north into Siberia, and they're living in teepees. And yeah, speaking a language, it sounds quite the same, and a very similar spiritual system, healing system, expressed with the round drum, the way of dancing, the way of chanting, the way of da-da-da. And of course, this actually goes into Europe too. If you go across into northern Scandinavia, you're going to find this with the Sami people. These are the last, if you like, indigenous people left in Europe. But of course, everyone in Europe is indigenous too. The Celts, the Vikings, they were all the people who
Yeah.
were there, right? And we've all been killing each other with great enthusiasm and committing genocide upon genocide on each other since the first person threw their leg over the back of a horse and realized it made you superhuman. And it seems to have started in a place in Western Russia called Lake Sintashta, where people began to breed horses for a higher wither about 4,000 years ago, where you could actually fix a saddle, because truly wild horses all have no wither, so saddles, they're hard to stay on. And they exploded out of there and killed everybody. and Mongolia, as you know, became the most violent culture on the planet for centuries. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan, Tamerlane, these people who would explode out of there, kill everybody from the Pacific to the Mediterranean for 20 years. And then Attila the Hun, all these people, and then sort of run out of energy, retreat back to the heartland, and then half a generation later explode out and do it again. And then somewhere in the 17th century, some Tibetan monks wandered over the Altai Plateau into Mongolia and just started talking about this thing called Buddhism. And in a generation, they kind of went, oh, yeah, we don't have to do that genocide stuff anymore. Yeah, it's kind of a stupid idea. Yeah, let's just have a good time here. And you now go to Mongolia and they're like the coolest people on the planet. And that trauma that then went obviously to the New World and everywhere else that was colonized was just simply the process of colonization that had been going on within Eurasia forever. And then it just, when people figured their way across the big oceans, well, they're just going to go do it over there now.
Yeah.
And also the people that they found in Africa and Native America were also frankly, doing it to each other. They were not saints. And so, okay, we're all as bad as each other, except for the hunter-gatherer people who don't do that stuff. But anyone who is a herding culture or a farming culture does this stuff. And so we have more in common than we think we do.
Mhm.
I also posit that within white America, there is and we haven't talked about Black America, obviously, there's also an inherited trauma of how they arrived, because a lot of people arrived in America because they were fleeing what was not so great in Europe and encountered great hardship when they got to the Americas, because there were, you could be exploited pretty well. And a lot of people, arrived there also as indentured labor and slaves. So the first slaves were actually Irish, and then they ran out of them and then started thinking, those West Africans look quite useful. Let's get them across into the Caribbean, and, brutal. And now we're all coming out of this and looking at each other going, well, we're all still here. And you know what? We all love our dogs and we all love our horses. Is it not time to just admit that we're just all the same? And I think what you're doing is so much a part of that. And this debt of gratitude that I've got to Native America. So for those who don't know, a lot of people know the story of how I went to Mongolia with my son, but what they don't know maybe is that there's a follow-up book called The Long Ride Home, which details the 3 journeys that I was told to make by the Mongolian shaman Ghost after he did his healing. And the last of those was on the Navajo reservation. And I had already had a lot of adventures on the Navajo reservation working in the human rights sector as a journalist. For sort of 10 or 15 years beforehand, I fell into it, following the story of an amazing woman called Roberta Blackgoat, who refused, remember her?
Yeah.
Yeah, she refused to move from that contested land that the Peabody Coal Company were going to blow up that sacred mountain, and she wouldn't go. And I went and stayed with her for a while, and back in the 90s, and was so privileged to see that traditional life. And anyway, so then I eventually end up there with my son and a healer whose real name is Chi, but he was also known as Blue Horse. And we call him Blue Horse in the book because we wanted to protect his identity a little bit, because we didn't want him getting overwhelmed. But Blue Horse is often what he went by. And he would use horse energy. After he healed my son, the healing rituals, and then we sweated on my son's behalf. But then he also did a ritual with making the fire, and then in the ash, seeing the patterns in the ash and interpreting what might still be in my son that was unhelpful and needed to come out. And then after we'd sweated all day, my wife and I, not Rowan, we didn't put him through the sweat lodge. And then the dawn, leaving the corn pollen ceremony that was done at dawn on the rim of the canyon, my son was still using very scripted language at this point. And you couldn't really have a conversation with him or like back and forth like we are. We get on Highway I-40, Interstate 40, heading out of the Navajo reservation towards Albuquerque. And as we go under Mount Taylor, which, as you know, is the eastern boundary, there's this like truck stop and a McDonald's, very prosaic after we've done this beautiful ceremony and so on and so on. And there's a truck stop and McDonald's. And in there, of course, there's these terrible, horrible drinks, slushies that have all these chemicals in them. And my son wants one, and I don't want to give him one because I know he'll send him nuts. And he has a big meltdown, and we get back in the car, and I'm like, oh, God, of course he's going to have a meltdown. Go on then, just knock yourself out. I was grumpy because I hadn't slept. And he goes from the back, so he goes, I'm not being grumpy, Dad. I'm just telling you what drink I want. And I just pulled over on the shoulder and went, "Who are you?" And from that moment on, we had actual conversation, and it happened right through and after these ceremonies. And I could go into more amazingness that's happened on the Navajo reservation, but the practice of horseboy method, which is how a lot of people have come to this podcast to know my work, would not have happened but for the input of Navajo Nation, Native America. And there was a generosity there. I think that's what I'm trying to put my finger on. That said, look, you're a white boy. Your people have done terrible things to our people, and we're frankly angry about it. But we see that your son needs help, and we're not going to be wankers. We're absolutely going to help him. And we just have to live within that ambivalence. And the help that they gave him was top notch. Talk to me about the concept of generosity, animal to human, human to animal, within Native America. And for people who are listening or watching this, who are practitioners of animal assisted stuff, what can we learn from that?
You ask great questions, Rupert. I think that, as I said before, every tribe is different, and
Yeah.
I don't want to gloss over that. I want to really recognize and ensure that we're
Indeed, but one can make generalizations even about, say, Europe. Okay, we're all different nations, and then
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah,
the European nation, we have
yeah.
1,000 different nations, and it's the same. But we
So
can also
right,
talk about Europe, Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So that said,
yeah.
yeah, it is such a moral foundation. It's such a foundational value within every tribal community I know of, and it is w- how you begin, and the demonstration of generosity is really how you begin and end every interaction. I think that has been my experience, and so there is an expectation of generosity as well. In some communities, like the Pacific Northwest communities, what we here in my family call the fish tribes, there's potlatch. There's a whole tradition of potlatch communities, where it's very ritualistic and very, ceremonially ostentatious, and that, you give, and in the extent which you can give, your status goes up, right? Like there's a
Mm,
direct correlation between the capacity to give and your standing. That is very specific to them. I too have experienced wait, nothing like you and your son, but my experience as an outsider in tribal communities with whom I've worked is extraordinary generosity to me, and a willingness to give me the benefit of the doubt, to
mm,
have faith that I am who I say I am, and I am there for the reasons I state.
mm,
And that's pretty extraordinary when you think about how much Native trust has been betrayed.
mm.
And yet it's still a social, um, mm, what's the term I'm looking for? It's a social construct that is
It's a
very
system of ethics.
us.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go. 100%. 100%. And I think that I not sure if this answers your question directly, but in terms of between humans and animals, there is an understanding that anything and everything an animal gives you is a gift, and it is to be respected and honored, on a
mm,
spiritual plane. And there is a reciprocity between humans and animals that is, I think, very special within tribal communities. It's recognized in a very special way and honored ceremonially, but then even just casually, socially.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
not so much seen as, and again, this is a generalization, and I apologize for that, but they're not seen as beasts of burden. They're seen as relatives, right?
this is the key, I think. So while you were talking earlier, I was looking up on my phone Cartesian relationship to animals. So, as you're probably aware, there was in the 17th century a bloke called Descartes, who was a
Mhm.
philosopher, right? And he is basically more or less considered responsible for the shift in Western thought to materialism, to saying, you know, for example, consciousness comes from the brain, or the universe is just a physical thing, or animals, because they don't speak and express emotion in the way that humans do, although they kind of do. I don't know how he could have come up with that, really, because I mean, anyone observing
Yeah.
a mammal, it's not that hard. It's not that different from us. To say, well, that means they don't have souls. And if they don't have souls, then they're just beasts of burden, and therefore they don't actually suffer. So it doesn't matter how much you abuse them.
And it's a
And
very atomized view.
it is. It is. Now, it was not always the European view by any means. So, you talked about like the potlatch and that kind of gift giving. That's Viking culture, right? And that's Germanic horse culture, the Goths, the Vandals, that, you talk. But what that Cartesian thing does come from is a little bit the cultures of the ancient world, starting in Mesopotamia, going into Egypt, then Greece and Rome, which were basically justifying slavery. And again, we haven't talked about the experience of Black America. And of course, Black America and Native America are often quite intertwined, because Native American generosity would often give sanctuary to runaway escaped slaves, which would bring down the wrath of the feds upon the Native Americans, blah, 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 blah. And there's many Black Native American tribes from the southern US all the way down into Central and South America, like the Garifuna and the Mosquito Indians and so on, Seminoles. But this Cartesian view of animals, I think, was just a kind of an inheritance of a certain kind of ancient world urbanized justification of enslaving any entity, human or animal. And that, of course, in the 19th century, expressed itself in America as manifest destiny. And therefore, well, you can't stop progress. So these people are in the way. And it doesn't really matter what we do with them. And anyway, we're going to give them roads, just like the Romans did. Going to give them roads and things like that. So, it doesn't really matter what we go in there and do. And therefore, it doesn't matter to the animals that what we do to the animals that carry us in there. So I think by the time, say, Native American people sitting on a horse were looking across at, say, a settler or a US cavalryman sitting on a horse, then you'd have two very, very, very different perceptions of what this horse meant.
And what's happening in that moment.
And what this land meant, and what this human relationship ought to be. Because we also know that the vast majority of Indian tribes actually were quite good to the whites when they first showed up, and then regretted it later. That generosity again. My feeling, having spent a bit of time in Native America, is that could we, as the white inheritors of that Cartesian, I think is the word, viewpoint, who are now going, yeah, of course animals have souls, of course we must have relationships with animals, of course and now that you got the Native Americans probably looking at that going, yeah, no shit, Sherlock,
What they think about One Health, the whole notion of One Health,
go
it's
on.
like,
Yeah.
have you one? Yeah, right.
No, talk to me about that. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No, please.
Yeah, so One Health is this concept, right, that animal health and human health are completely interrelated and therefore must be considered together. And, the World Health Organization has a big One Health program.
Okay.
The United States, at least, I don't know what time it is, they used to have a One Health program. I, I can't
Good.
keep up.
Okay.
Yeah. But, it's just for Native people, when they hear about One Health and these fancy found, basically white, highly hyper educated white professionals come into their community to tell them about One Health, what they're really doing is saying back to Native people what they have always known and have never stopped practicing, and that is that, the human life and animal life is completely interconnected, and that is true on the spiritual plane as well as the practical physical plane. And so, of course, our health is interrelated. And that's not any kind of aha moment in Indian country. And they just sort of chuckle, because they tend to be a very polite people. And so, anyway, yeah, that's One Health. And it feels
Okay.
like an appropriation of an essential native value that, sort of Western medicine has figured out how to commoditize and brand, but we're all for it.
Yeah. Provided, yeah, put the money where the mouth is, if possible.
Mhm.
If someone is listening to this conversation from, say, Slovakia or Pakistan, let alone Leicestershire in England or Ohio in the States, and they are practitioners, let's say they animal assisted practitioners, doesn't have to just be equine. What would be the sort of, it doesn't have to be the one thing, what would be the paramount things that you think they could learn from the Native American way of relating to particularly companion animals that could help all of us better our practice, no matter what culture we're coming out of?
You know, this is so simple. I fear it will sound trite, but I'm going to share with you something that someone recently shared with me that just really landed for me and has been changing for me as a person. And it is so simple, which is to recognize that maybe our job every day is really simple, and that is to be a good relative. Be a good relative to these animals. When you really boil something down to something that basic, all of a sudden, anything seems possible and practical. Like, what does that mean? This is, my dog Luke, and the Choctaw people raise these Catahoula leopard dogs to hunt for bears and pigs in the swamps. And he loves to get in on a good Zoom call. So my apologies.
No,
But
he's a gentleman. Yeah.
yeah, I really try to be a good relative to Luke, which means that I try every day to put myself in his place and think, what's a good day for Luke? And make time for that and do that thing. And I think that I'm not well traveled like you are. I haven't been all over the world. So I don't know what would resonate for people outside the United States. But if it's someone in Ohio, like you mentioned, I think it would be to understand that when you're dealing with a companion animal, the you are dealing with a companion. Doesn't matter if they're an animal or not.
Mhm.
It's companionship that the whole thing, everything should pivot upon. So you have to deal with both ends of the leash, right? Don't just treat the animal and the person who is their relative. It's like cancer. Cancer happens to the whole family. You can't just treat the patient. You treat the whole family because otherwise the patient won't do well. The patient will not thrive. And I
You could
think
actually say the same for autism, and yeah, absolutely serve the whole family.
serve the
Absolutely.
whole family. I think that, and so, yeah, be a good relative.
Be a good relative. That doesn't sound trite at all. Okay. Now, speaking of being good relatives, couple of challenging questions back to the perception from outsiders of how animals might get treated differently in Native American context. And again, I think this will help us understand about our relationship to animals in general. So I was recently at a equine conference in the USA, another one after we've
Okay.
met in Florida. And it is part run by people who are very much Mustang advocates. And one of the topics of conversation that came up in these presentations was that there is a problem, I was told, on Indian reservations where Mustangs are rounded up wholesale and sold for meat. I don't know if this is true or not. And they were saying this is part of the general problem because it's also going on outside of Native America. But they said, we can affect it to some degree within white America, but Native American nations are their sovereign nations. So we can't really go in there and do anything to better the lot of those Mustangs there. And I heard that and I was like, well, that's interesting because, I know the Plains cultures in particular and the Western American cultures of Native America to be very horse friendly, very pro horse. So I wonder what the real story here is. And of course, I thought of you. I thought, I wonder what Brandy would say if she was in the room. So this is kind of my chance to ask you a little bit about that. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, so I think this is really complicated.
Yeah.
And my time to confess, this is why the Native American Humane Society does not include within its scope horses,
Okay.
because it is so complex. And honestly, if we can be impactful, regarding companion animals, we'll have really done a good job achieving a mission for Native people. This is complicated because of the land, right?
Mm.
So I'm going to tell you, I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I can give you a couple of scenarios that I
Right. And I'm not looking for a definitive answer.
complexity.
I'm looking for a
Yeah.
discussion. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So the Salt River Pima Indian tribe in Arizona have an extraordinary program that is a wild horse sanctuary.
Mm.
It's amazing. And the next time you're here, we should go
Salt
there.
River Pima in Arizona.
Salt River, yeah, in Scottsdale. Uh,
Yeah, actually,
usually
that sounds like Phoenix to me. Yeah. Okay.
you associate Scottsdale with, country clubs and
Golf courses. Yeah.
resort living, sure. But the Salt River Pima are still there, and they have this extraordinary wild horse, Mustang sanctuary.
Mm.
The same is true of the Hoopa Indians in Northern California on the Pacific coast. The two could not situationally be more different from each other. And you're absolutely right. There is this thriving, beautiful horse culture within Indian country. And also, we have a little land problem. There's once a really funny native comedian named Charlie Hill who went on the David Letterman show, a nighttime talk show here, and said, so Indians have a little real estate problem. And that real estate problem is a real problem for animals, two-legged and four-legged, and for wild horses especially. So Indian reservations are primarily, not exclusively, but mostly comprised of federal land. That means it's not private land. It cannot be owned in fee. It cannot be bought or sold. It's being held in trust for the benefit of tribes by the federal government. That means there is no property tax base. And that is why you don't see animal welfare programs and systems on Indian reservations, because the tribe doesn't have the capacity to raise revenue for animal systems like local towns or counties. The way all that stuff is paid for is...
Can I just go devil's advocate for a moment? Because I can hear a whole bunch of Americans saying, what about the casinos?
Yeah. So the casinos are the most regulated, tribal casinos are the most regulated businesses in the United States.
Right.
And who benefits the most from tribal casinos are states. And that's pursuant to the federal law that allows tribal gaming, the Native American Indian Gaming Act, or NIGA. And so that's all been negotiated by the federal government and the states. So the states get the most. And to the extent that tribal casinos are profitable, they are typically being managed by the big gaming concerns, right? So I would just like to say for the record that what you see when you see a successful tribal casino is not a money-making machine that is exclusively for the benefit of the tribe, which is what we all assume, right? And so you'd be
Well,
surprised.
we would hope as
Well,
well.
right, we would hope so, but that's usually not the case, and then those monies are already identified in terms of how they can be spent, so
Okay.
that's why not. And
Okay.
then
Good answer.
and then those monies are prioritized for human needs.
Yeah.
Education is at the top of every tribe's list. Every tribe that has a casino is spending money. They're plowing it into education, housing, senior services, stuff like that,
Mm.
including my own, the Choctaw Nation. So that's why not the tribal casino. So now you've got land that there's no tax base for it. And you have federal agencies that really dictate what can be, how that land can be used, what can be done on the land. And out west, it's the Bureau of Land Management. And,
Yeah.
BLM are really the decision makers when it comes to wild horses in the western part of the United States, which is,
Including on Indian land.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
And so the tribe has a seat at the table, but BLM is calling the shots.
I see.
And so the decision making is structurally complicated. The agendas are nuanced
Mm.
and competing. And so, for example, if you have a herding nation, right?
Mm.
You have grazing permits
Mm.
and people who have grazing permits, and those grazing, if you can't own land, having a grazing permit is the only chance you have to exert agency over land as though it is your own.
Right.
So, what a wild horse can represent to a native family with a grazing permit who's running sheep is like an existential threat to their own existence. And it's likely that a tribal community where there's a lot of herding is also a tribal community where there's a lot of poverty. So the opportunity to make money
By herding those wild horses. Yeah. Yeah.
by herding
Effectively.
those wild horses may look different to them than to me.
Yeah.
And I have, so it does happen. It
Mm.
is controversial within tribal communities because you have traditional families who think it's an abomination, that it's a betrayal of traditional Native American beliefs. And then you have other families who think it's survival
Yeah.
and it's us or them. And I don't know how to mediate that because both are true.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. And I don't think there's an easy answer. It's an interesting discussion because it brings up this whole other discussion of, are horses feral in the United States or are they native? Because although the conquistadors did bring them back, they had actually been here. They had been present some thousands of years before and then had gone. And that's why they thrive so well, because it is actually original habitat. And it creates a really interesting ecological discussion, particularly, as you say, if the people having that discussion or leading that discussion are the descendants of the conquistadors. And I don't think we're going to arrive at a definitive answer. But I think what's useful about those types of questions is that they just draw attention to the fact that there are all sorts of ambiguities. And to get anywhere real in life, one actually has to deal in ambiguity and compromise. I think you answered that very well. I've got a second question, which is, I know of one good, doesn't mean that there aren't others, but I only happen to know of one person who's really working in the equine assisted sphere within Native America and making a difference. There's a woman called Jessica Whiteplume, and I want to get her on this show, and I can't find her email address, and I keep trying, because she was on Warwick Schiller's podcast, the Journey On podcast, which is really good, and I've met her, and she's doing amazing work with that in Native America, and I would like to get involved. And then I had also spent some time on the Nez Perce reservation years ago when I was following the release of wolves into the American West, and I followed that in its early stages in the 90s as a journalist. And you may well be familiar with this, but it's very interesting. You know, in Yellowstone, the wolves were released, and there's no doubt that the ecology benefited massively. And then the wolves have since gone out and colonized many other places, and some people love it, some people hate it, but what's nice is they're back. In the neighboring state of Idaho, so that was Wyoming, Montana, as you know, in Idaho, which has a sliver of Yellowstone, the government moved in very quickly to try to scupper and sabotage the wolf reintroduction program there. And it was the Nez Perce Indians who stepped up, casino owners, interesting, and said, actually, for us, the wolves are a symbol of family. We want them back. And they funded it. And but what they also did, as you know, the Nez Perce, they're very much a horse culture. And Appaloosa horses in the US, well, that's the Nez Perce Indians. Any of us who own an Appaloosa have ever owned an Appaloosa. Okay, maybe they actually came from Knabstruber lines brought over from Europe by the Spanish, okay. But nonetheless, taken by the Nez Perce and a whole culture and a whole breed. And they had a program for quite a long time with youth, which I looked at a little bit when I was there with Appaloosa breeding and training. Are you aware of what's going on within Native America within these sort of equine assisted things at all? And what, if so, I know this is outside of your dog companion
Yeah.
animal, but what are there conversations going on, and what are you aware of?
So I'm not aware of enough as much as I should. So no, I just wanted to mention, yeah, I've heard of Jessica White Plume too. I similarly would love to chat with her. So maybe you and I can.
Jessica, are you watching this? Can
That's
you
right.
Yeah. If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com. Check out the free introduction course. Take it from there.
So I would love to be a part of that conversation. So I think I could be wrong. So anyone out there, please take this with a grain of salt. But I think that the program in the Nez Perce tribe was started by a Navajo gentleman named Rudy Shabala. Have you ever heard his name?
I have not. Please tell me.
So Rudy recently passed away, and he's an extraordinary person. He's the kind of guy who found a way to work horses into every conversation inside the first 5 minutes. Didn't matter what
Sounds
you're
like
talking
me.
about. Yeah, it really didn't matter. He would link everything back to a horse.
Okay.
And so he was born and raised on the Navajo Nation, in a traditional Navajo family. And he found a way to walk in both worlds. And he went off and got his PhD and fell in love with a Native American woman who is not Navajo. And I think in Idaho. and raised a family there, and for many years ran a horse program for the Nez Perce tribe, and I believe it's the one you're describing. That's a youth program.
Hmm.
And Rudy just recently passed away. You might be interested to know that Rudy, in the final years of his life, was working very hard on establishing a registry of what he believed to be the original American horse. That was a Native American horse that was a smaller horse, and that he was working with the University of Kentucky doing this genetic research, and he wanted to bring back the original native horse. I don't know more than that, but it's a shame that Rudy left us before you two getting a chance to meet each other, because I have a feeling that you would have become dear friends. I will say something that I hope, I don't mean disrespect to our tribal partners or my, native friends, but I think that there is so much unmet need in tribal communities, that the needs of individuals who have learning differences or neurological differences, or I hate to use the term disabilities, but
Sure.
just different disabilities, they there are not enough services for them. They're not enough a part of the conversation. And so I think that this is very new to
Mm.
in most tribal communities. And I'm going to seek them out though now. And I think that this is going to sound terrible, Rupert. I don't, again, I am afraid to say this, but I'm going to go ahead because I feel like I'm safe and you're really candid. And so here I go. I think for much the same reason why the needs of dogs are not at the top of a priority list, because they're so busy trying to deal with the needs of two-legged family members, housing, clean water, electricity, access to broadband, all those things. They just don't make the list.
Mm.
And similarly, trying so hard to deal with the needs of mainstream tribal members. They oftentimes just don't have the bandwidth to deal with special needs,
Mm.
because basic needs are still front of mind. And because the federal government has not, probably the Indian Health Service is the primary agency to provide healthcare in tribal communities. And I know that this is emergent, right? I'm not the first person to say this or to recognize this, but this is still relatively
Yeah.
new. And so, yeah, I don't know. I wish I did. And I'm going to seek that out and I'll let you know.
Well, here's a question then. I mean, I think I'd love to collaborate with you and with Jeff, and that's your husband. And
Yeah.
if you actually, I'd like to get him on the other show, which is Live Free, Ride Free, to talk about his career in Indian law. Actually, maybe both of you together, because that's a different conversation. And I think we touch on a lot on human rights on that one.
Okay.
That's my other podcast.
Yep.
But I work so much in the USA, and Horseboy originated in the USA.
Mhm.
And I owe such a debt of gratitude to Native America for my son, for my career, because also my break into human rights journalism was through the Cree Indians up in northern Quebec. We haven't told that story yet, but they gave me my first big break.
Oh,
Yeah. Quickly, I was living in Canada, trying to establish myself as a writer. I'd gone to Canada because I was in love with a Canadian girl who dumped me. And then I kind of survived and broke into journalism and got wind of this story that a government hydro company called Hydro Quebec was going with the government there to flood an area the size of France. The size of France. France is quite a big country. Quebec is huge, as you know, it's the size of Western Europe. And this was below James Bay. This is all Cree land. And they had actually done something quite similar in the 70s and had to pay a big reparation to the Cree. And the Cree had done something very clever. They'd used a lot of that money to send a bunch of their people to law school. because they knew it would come back again, and it did, and it came back bigger. And what was going to happen, it was reckoned, was that the flow of water, the displacement, was going to cause the Earth's crust to shift locally, which would release mercury from the bedrock. It had already happened, but on a much greater scale, and poison everybody, in that catchment area, which included, people down in the United States. And the Cree were trying to bring this to the attention of the New England states who were going to buy the hydropower. And this was a big story in Canada, and it was all over the papers, but it wasn't really being reported in the US. It certainly wasn't being reported in the UK or Europe. So I rang a large London paper from my sort of slightly homeless life in Montreal and said, if I got you this story,
From
would
you
you publish
kids
it?
in Montreal.
Yeah. And they said, well, we've got no idea who you are, but, go get the story and send it to us and we'll see. And I did. And I went up there, and I didn't have any credentials. And the tribal council the band council who I had contacted, when I arrived, they looked at me and my photographer, who was just my friend who took good pictures, and said, where's your winter gear? Because it was March and it was, it's James Bay. It's like serious winter. And we said, well, we're wearing it because, we're Canadian boys, right? And they just laughed at us and said, okay. They took us and they kitted us out with caribou and moose skin parkas and leggings and stuff up to here. And they took us out onto the trap lines and they showed us a way of life of people still living under canvas, people still living in teepees, living off the forest, and saying, I don't know if your people back in London will value this, but this is our life and our culture, and this is what's at stake. And they chartered like a seaplane for us to go up into these, it was thousands and thousands of dollars that we could, normally you need a budget for this from a newspaper. I didn't have anything. They just did it. Anyway, I came back with the story and I published it, and it broke the story in Europe, and it was my big break. And the Cree were actually successful. They fought off Hydro-Quebec, and they taught me a really valuable lesson. They not only gave me generously my first big break, but they, at their own expense really, but they showed me that those human rights endeavors against the odds often actually work if a small group of people get together and sort of decide to. And then that played out into my later life with similar types of work in Africa and the Kalahari and so on. And then later, of course, with autism advocacy. You could argue that I got my apprenticeship in all that from the Cree, who owed me nothing. So I feel like I have a debt to settle with Native America for my career and for the health of my son and for the birth of Horseboy, which happened in Comancheria, which is central Texas, which, by the way, has no Comanches in it because the genocide was pretty darn, thorough.
Complete.
Yep. Yep. And I would like to give my services. So I don't want to do it in a way of white boy comes in and, blah, blah, blah. I just want to collaborate our technologies and say, well, what can we do? There is a need, as you say, within special needs. There is a need within animal welfare, but there's also a lot that we can learn about animal welfare outside of Native America. It's both. It's not a one-way thing. Are you up for it? Shall we give it a go?
Oh my God, absolutely. Geez, in that 5 seconds, I was wondering how I was going to convince you to work with me in my capacity.
Oh, I was hoping I was going to convince you. Well, great. Well, I'm convinced.
Yeah, right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. There's something I want to share with you that is kind of a callback to the earlier part of our conversation. And this is something that I am still on a journey of learning from my Navajo sister. And she's an extraordinary person. She has advanced degrees. She works within a healthcare system. at a very high level. She's asked to speak in New York City and Washington, D.C. And she's speaking with pharmaceutical companies and medical technology companies and thought leaders in public health in the United States. And she lives traditionally. She lives in a place near the Grand Canyon on the Navajo Nation where she and her family only recently got indoor running water and electricity, and they really struggled over that because it's a trade-off. So she is a national expert and spokesperson on a specific topic in public health, Western medicine. And she is a traditional Navajo woman who is a practitioner also of Navajo medicine. And she works in a hospital and, went home to a traditional home site that she shares with her husband and sons. And she is not atypical. That's pretty common there.
Mm,
This ability to walk in both worlds
mm,
and to maintain a balance between them.
mm.
And I'm sure you know this, but the Navajo word for what we would say is balance is and Hojo is the ethical North Star of the Dene, of the Navajo people. And it's a really profound concept. And, it's interesting. You were talking about, balance on a horse and our balance with animals, the idea of not only relationality, but balance between ourselves and within ourselves is really central to everything. And when I first went to work for the Navajo Nation, and I worked in their Washington office, and my job, I was an employee of the Navajo Nation. This was before my husband and I struck out on our own and created this tribal advocacy consultancy, which we've had for almost 30 years. But I learned from all of my Navajo teachers. And I learned all the stats about the Navajo Nation, the lack of paved roads and running water and electricity in homes and all of that. And collectively, when presented all at once, it has the same effect as poverty porn. And this person who I've been describing to you, who I consider, we claim each other as sisters. One day, she said, Brandy, for many of us, that's a lifestyle choice. And I just stopped dead in my tracks. And she said, we are choosing to maintain our traditional way of life. And I teased her. I was like, oh my God, you're off grid. You're just Navajos off grid. And so yeah, they've always been off grid, right? It's not some, new green initiative that they're getting tax rebates for. That's something that I try to remember always, that what we think we see when we visit a community that is so different from our own and that is really ancient, what we think we see may not actually be what we see because we don't have access to the information and knowledge that's necessary to decipher it.
Yeah.
And that's only going to be provided to you when you've earned the trust of folks with that, when you've only earned their trust to be given that information, right?
Mm,
And so I guess how that relates to our conversation about animals, it's so obvious, but it bears repeating. When you visit a reservation, and unless you're from there, you're a visitor and should behave accordingly, there's a really good chance you don't know what you're seeing.
mm,
And you have to humble yourself to that reality and understand that what is our objective, which might be safety, right? Like everyone has to be safe. And so all the dogs have to be inside and all the children accounted for. That might not be their highest cultural value. Maybe theirs is Hojo, maybe it's balance. And balance and safety are not the same thing. And, I just wanted to share that with you because our conversation has sort of reminded me of that. And I
Yeah.
just to thread that through it because it has been so impactful to me. Because as a lawyer,
Mm.
as a, social justice warrior, I really thought that I was helping, right? And I think you will see if you, ever take a look at the Native American Humane Society website,
Mm.
that you're not going to find poverty porn. You're not going to find
What's poverty porn? That's a great term, but I've
that,
not heard it until just now.
well, it might be one that until this moment was only ever uttered in my house. You know, images of a people that are bleak and only look at them through a lens it's a window and you're
Yeah.
just looking at the desperate straits.
To make yourself feel better about yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, you're basically imposing upon a people a narrative
Right.
that basically says, "Look at these poor people. They have nothing. They need everything. We must help them."
Mm.
And there's a lot of like child international hunger campaigns that, feature poverty porn. It's terribly effective as all porn is.
Yeah.
There's arguably no more effective communication than pornography. But what does that
That
really
used to be the case until
Oh,
social media.
okay, right. You
You're
can
right.
tell
It used
based
to
on
be
the
that
thi
sex sell was the
Yeah, yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Now we've realized, no, anger and fear sell.
Yeah,
Way
rage,
rage
rage.
sells. Yeah.
So I mean, as well-meaning as that is, it can also be dehumanizing
Sure.
because if the subject of that narrative, you likely don't want that to be the only thing that is said about you. And it feels very exploitative.
Yeah.
And I will just share this, getting back to animals. That is the system of funding animal welfare really rewards that, right? So that if you go to a community and you
Mm.
do a mobile spay neuter, clinic, let's say, gosh darn it, you're going to get on social media and you're going to show the most vivid.
Gonna show the need. Yeah, absolutely.
You're going to show the need and you're going to be
Yeah.
rewarded for the need. And it's a head count and it's a heartstring pull. And Native people are sick and tired of being the subject of that.
Mm.
Because what it's really doing is it's objectifying and commoditizing a situation and that you may or may not understand, that you may or may not have been given permission to even,
Mm.
you know, claim in any way. And it's disrespectful. And I think getting back to being a good relative, it's kind of like taking pictures of uh, mm,
Yeah, sure. Imagine if someone came into my messy room and took pictures of my messy room and put them on a website about how we need to relieve people from living in messy rooms.
or you're a
And
horrible.
say, yeah, hey, I didn't give you permission to use that picture. And they're like,
You know
yeah,
what?
your room's such a mess, Rue. Yeah, yeah. You
It's
need
like
help.
I go to the YMCA, right? And you're not allowed to take pictures in the locker room
Yeah,
because you're so vulnerable, right? You don't
yeah,
want someone
yeah,
taking a picture of you like, oh my God, look at this woman. And you
yeah.
don't want to have the picture is of like, oh my God, look at this poor community. It's just we can do better than that. We can be better better relatives to each
Well,
other.
it's what's really interesting about the point that you make there is that's, of course, how often people perceive special needs. And it comes from a good place. I mean, and if you're running the Native American Humane Society, you do need to let people know why there is a need and why they should donate. And at the same time, you want to be respectful and it's all about that treading that ambiguous line again. I think the only way that one can really do that well is by giving the people who one is trying to serve the voice. So, where I'm lucky, say, with my relationship with Rowan, you met Rowan, you saw Rowan speaking.
Yeah.
So, and he's sort of telling his story and explaining how autism feels from the inside and what his relationship with animals has been and so on. And so he's an advocate for why animal assisted therapies should be supported. He's exactly the person who should be saying it because he is the recipient, and he's now actually part of a PhD program that's happening at Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK, looking at how to better equine assisted practices for autistic people by finally consulting with autistic people and who have had equine services and saying to them what worked well and what should change. You know, entirely rational thing to do. That study happens to be run by somebody who runs a horseboy program, but yeah, within the equine assisted world, I've also seen very much the opposite way, which is we are the therapists and we are God and we provide the service and look at these poor people who need the service. And you can absolutely see why that mindset comes about. And I can't condemn it because it's understandable, but it's too
Yeah.
simplistic. And it doesn't bring about the real change, which is self-advocacy, self-agency, to say, well, are we services that train people as they would in any walk of life to go into their professional lives later? Or are we just leading kids around for a pony ride saying, oh, how sweet? And there's an evolution there. It might have started that way, but it shouldn't stay there. And I think what you're doing, you say, well, there is poverty, but there's also a different way of relating to animals. Perhaps some of those animals are actually happier and better treated than animals that might be outside the reservation, even if it might not appear that way at first. And similarly within the human communities. And at the same time, some of the animals are abused and some of them really do need help. And some of the humans are abused. And one does not negate the other. One needs to hit it bang in the middle. But as you say, that discernment is hard to come by if you haven't, spent your life doing that kind of thing. As you say, what you see may not be what is. Yeah. Yeah.
I tell you what, I think that humility and advocacy are hard to hold at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
And
So true.
and
True. So
I
true. So true.
guilty, I
Guilty myself. I have, yeah.
totally guilty.
I have
And
let, yeah, absolutely.
and
Because it gives you power. Being an advocate does give you power. Yeah.
yeah,
That can be intoxicating. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's very seductive and it's
Mhm,
very,
mhm.
there's it's easy to lie to yourself.
Oh, and righteous anger is the worst
Yeah,
kind because that's when people really do the bad stuff, is when they are justified in it.
right,
That's
right.
when you got to watch out for your soul. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say I am just so thrilled for Roland and for you and his family and his friends and everyone who love him and have been part of his journey. I only got to meet him for a few moments and he's just such a badass.
Isn't he?
And yeah, he just is. He's just great.
Yeah, he is.
And inviting me to work with you and maybe collaborating with the Native American Humane Society is so exciting because what I want to share with you, and I just want the chance to say this out loud. It's often said that there is a res dog problem on Indian reservations, but I think it's entirely possible that the dogs are less a problem than the solution. They may be a problem right now in terms of daily nuisances regarding the small stuff in life, like, I don't know, noise and mess, right? But when it comes to the more complex stuff, they might be the solution. One of the real challenges on every reservation, which again is directly part of the continuum of genocide colonization, trauma, is mental health and suicide.
Yeah.
And when you think about horses and dogs, and honestly, I have friends who would kick me if I didn't say that Native people just think of horses as big dogs, right? They're companion animals. So I have the president of our board, whom you met, Dr. Michael Yellowbird, who, like my husband, is a member of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. He's like, we have to start bringing horses back into our mission. And I said, but Dr. Yellowbird, we're just focusing on companion animals. He's like, Brandy, they are companion animals. And of course he's right, right?
Yeah.
But because we're not trading in poverty porn, I don't have the budget yet, but we'll get there. And I'm sure with your help, that will happen sooner than later. But here's the thing. In a community where pe- children are killing themselves, what's easier, more readily available source of comfort could there be than a companion animal, whether it's a
Mm.
horse or a cat or
Mm.
a dog? And no one has like built programs around that in Indian country. And I would really love it if we could start helping folks think about that and think about what that
Mm.
could mean for them in a way that resonates culturally and, kind of like vibrates for them.
Yeah, I feel we need to get Jessica White Plume into this conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, because I think this is exactly where she's been working. And get some mentorship, get some direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like they say, like we are our own medicine,
Yeah.
but can't access it. Isn't that a shame? But yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm the crazy woman who's saying, no, dogs aren't the problem. They're the answer.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, back to, us in Missoula 8-10 weeks ago with the presentation going on about homeless and dogs and thinking, yeah, those dogs are keeping those people alive. Mm.
The dog that was sleeping in the guitar case across the street from the event,
Yeah.
there was a homeless gentleman who was
Yeah.
busking street corner, and there was his dog very happily sleeping in
Yeah.
the guitar case.
Yeah. Absolutely. 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 Okay. I'm intrigued. And I'm going to throw this out here as a challenge. Readers, not readers, viewers and listeners, if you are in the equine assisted world or the animal assisted world in North America, do you want to get involved in this as well? Come on. This is going to be so cool. Why would we not? It's adventure. And what better way to pay our debts, heal our wounds, explore the West? Well, the whole thing, actually, not just the West, but not to go in with a sense of white Indian, Indian white. How about people and animals, but people who are of the place, who can orient us? So many of us are so lost. Doesn't mean that they have all the answers, but they've been on that land a long time. And they will certainly have some answers. And if we can humbly give what we can give and collaborate and let the animals kind of be the medicine to heal that stupid monkey shit that we get up to. Because yeah, you're a dog. Luke back there isn't relating to me as white or you as native. He's just looking at the two monkeys yabbering for 2 hours, you know,
Yeah.
and he loves us
But
each unconditionally. It's just the yabber monkeys, who happen to be his companion as well.
that's right.
So maybe we yabber monkeys can, tribe is such an interesting thing. I'm a great believer in it. My family's very tribal. White Africans are very tribal as well. They've learned, but so are Europeans. The Scots hate the English, the Welsh hate the English, the Irish hate the English because of our tribal histories. Then you go, village to village within England, and the people from that side of the county have always fought with the people from that side of the county for the last 10,000 years. And, then it all culminated in World War II, which was our glorious expression of tribal warfare that made us realize that maybe we can't quite go on like that anymore. But tribe is also community. There's the dysfunctional tribes that eat themselves, and then there's the tribes that actually look after each other. And when I'm doing horseback method trainings, I'm always talking about how you cultivate tribe, because that is the fundamental human way to live on planet Earth, no matter what continent you're talking about. That's what's needed. And if it's the animals that bring us back to that, well, let's do it and go into service, because that's where our quality of life is. What are animals but nature? What is nature but the planet? What is the planet but what we rely upon? If we can treat a dog well, if we can treat a horse well, we've got a better chance of treating each other well, got a better chance of making sure there's food in the fridge and not, actually having a planet in another couple of generations. So we know that all of this is connected. We know that the better side of tribalism, not the worst side of tribalism, is where happiness lies. Medicine, as you would say, I think it's time we just got on with it.
We all carry our own medicine because we all carry our own stories, and we would do well to humble ourselves to listen to each other's stories, I think. And I think that gathering together around animals could create an opportunity to do just that, where daily life otherwise prevents those kinds of moments of community and a deep introspection.
And stories can divide as well as unite. Mm-hmm. If the story is blood feud, the story is your grandfather did that to my grandfather. Right. If the story is your people did that to my people, that can be true. But there's also another story of common humanity. That's also true. But I totally hear you. It's animals that allow us to hear that second story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like it's more necessary now than ever. That's in part because I'm 61 and I want to get something right before I go,
Well, I think you've probably got more decades than you think. So you can.
Well, no, I'm not going anywhere, but I feel like
yes, I hear you though.
Such important work, right? I suggest to the Native American Humane Society without knowing anything about it. And I think Native American was my buy-in, but humane is what is keeping me.
Absolutely.
Because that is such a profound word that is so needed now more than ever. Not just, yes, it feels really prescient because I'm, older and I want to, be a part of something that is that important. But because of what's happening in the world right now, and I know that for a lot of us, we don't know what to do. And it's scary. God, it just feels like, like kind of the doors of hope are just shutting, right? But there are opportunities to come together. And and animals create really wonderful, organic ways to do that are accessible to us.
Yes, they do.
And I think that, and in that way, they are going to, if you feel isolated, if you feel disempowered, if you feel lost, if you can find community with animals and with other people who want to have this dialogue around animals, that's something we can do, and we don't need anyone's permission to do it.
Yeah,
Uh, and I think it's really necessary, and it could be transformative
I
for
agree.
some of us.
Yes, if we can get the interspecies thing a bit better, we can probably get our intra-species thing a bit better.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. No, I hear you. Well, I'm in.
Okay,
I think a lot of our listeners are too. So
awesome.
I'll have a chat with some other people in Horseboy World. We're having this conversation in end of 2025. Fall of 2026, there is going to be a neuroscience conference within movement method, which is our non-horse therapy approach, which we get asked to put on by Eastern Virginia Medical School, which is part of Dominion University, and it's about movement and nature and the mind and mental health, particularly from a pediatrician's point of view. I think maybe let's meet there, and there'll be a bit of a gathering of the Horseboy folk, and let's have a bit of a breakout session and talk about this.
Sounds
All right. And I think I might be starting a program, or not me, but one of the people who was actually at the conference we met in Missoula. Her family ranch is in North Dakota, and you're now moving to. We're talking about getting a program. So anyway, things are clearly coming together. Let's chat and see what we can do. I'm so up for the adventure.
well. Me too. And boy, I would love for you and Rowan and your wife to come visit us in North Dakota. It would be amazing. I think you have to bring your sleeping bags. We might have you on TVs. But
So up for that.
the next time we chat, I'll be there. We're in April.
All right. All right. All right. Okay. And then and let's get you also and Jeff on the Live Free Ride Free podcast and
Okay. Yeah.
conversation.
Just stay in touch.
I will. All right. I guess we're at that 2-hour mark, so it's probably time to say Auf Wiedersehen. I will see you on the next one.
Like, wonderful.
Rather than goodbye. This has been so great, Brandy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to have met you and Rowan, and for you to be willing to keep that conversation going. And I'm very curious and excited to see where it takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Till the next
Right.
time.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine assisted field or are considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.